We're going to go over the rigging shelf that's included with the JamRig or RigBot systems. So once you initially run RigBot, you can load and reload the shelves from the toolbox over here. If you're using JamRig, that will already be installed for you and gets automatically, it's locked off and you get what you get. Make sure you save your shelves. So going from left to right, you've got a debug. So toggle debug turns on and off, which will give you much more robust feedback in the script editor when you build. Revert will revert your scene file. Load will load the last save. These next three buttons will only work in the home environment. They will not work at the office because you will need to be using your pipeline tools for saving, loading, and publishing scenes and rigs. But if you're at home, it will just save your scene file to a scenes folder under your asset. So you can have, like little mini mock pipeline tools at home. So you can load the latest scene, save the latest scene, publish a rig, which will basically save scene, but to the rig folder so that you can have a clean rig for, delivering a rig over for a freelancer or whatever, or to an outside vendor. Print. So let's load a rig, for example. Okay, this is a model. So print will print any existing connections. If you right click, you can print connections, print world transforms, all goes to the script editor. You can print the selection as a list. So if you want a few guys highlighted and you want them in a Python list, you can do this and you'll get a nice long Python formatted variable that you can use to add into your code. You can do it in 1, 2, 3, or 4 columns. Print valid control name shapes, that applies to this guy, but it's outdated, so I wouldn't recommend using it right now. You can print clashing node names. If you have any clashing node names in the scene that need to be fixed, it'll print those into the script editor and select them. Then you have LRAs. You can toggle the local rotational axis for any selected nodes. You have your joint display, which you can also right click and have, incremental joint sizes. Then you have delete history. If you right click, you have delete non-deformer history. You have freeze, which will freeze the transforms, translates, rotates, and scales. You can also freeze individual channels. You can zero the pivots. You can freeze and snap the pivot to the last target. Then you have lock. You can lock and hide attributes. So if you just hit the lock button, it completely locks everything in the channel box. Same thing if you hit the unlock. And then you can lock translates, lock rotates, and so on. User defined, visibility, scales. Then you have display. So display override, turn it off. You can display override and set everything to referenced, where you can no longer select it. You can set things to template. And you can also, like I said, just turn things off. Then you have the skin button. Skin button by default will try to load NG Skin Tools. It's a third-party tool that I highly recommend you use for painting weights. But if you don't have that available, it will just load the default Maya Skin Paint Weights tool. Also, you have a lot of little handy skin cluster tools here, like copy the bind from one object to another. You can add influences from a source. So if you have one piece of geometry that has joints A, B, C, and D, and the next piece of geometry has joints A, you can it will find the influences from the first skin cluster and apply them into, it'll add the influences into the next skin cluster. So you can add all the influences from another mesh. Then you have remove unused influences, turn off inherit transforms, which is something that happens automatically when you build, so that things that are skin clustered don't get double transformed, and they can remain in a hierarchy, in whatever model hierarchy your model is published as. You can unlock influence weights, select influences, print influences for the object, go to the bind pose. Bind skin and uninherit transforms is just a little shortcut. Then you have the cluster tool. You can create clusters from one object to another. So let's say I have a locator and this guy. So weighted node, pre-bind node, which I'm not going to worry about that right now, and you can create the cluster, which is paintable. You can also create weights based off of soft selection. So it's the same, create cluster with soft select weighted. Which that doesn't seem to work right now. This is still in progress. Then you have your Maya blend shape editor, you have your pose interpolator editor, then you have create constraints, which by default it will create a matrix constraint. So you select the driven node first, then the driver. So your geo, then your locator. You hit this guy and you get a matrix constraint, which lets you one thing to note, matrix constraints only work when things are frozen and the pivots are at the origin. So let's try it again. There we have that guy, and non-uniform scaling and shearing works perfectly fine when you have matrix constraints. Much more useful and faster and more robust than parented scale constraints. The next thing is create locator. So based off of whatever you have selected, it'll create a locator to snap to the center of it. So another thing is set driven key editor, then selections. So the very first time you hit this, you're going to get an error, but you can store selections into a quick variable. So you're going to want to right click, save selection to variable. So then in the future, you can just click this button and it is all saved. So you can just simply update your variable by saying save selection to variable, and then that is now stored. You can also reverse the selection, add selected variable, deselect the variable, select mirrored node names. So if you have something that's left-sided, it'll find the right-sided. You can select add the mirrored node name, so it'll keep the left side selected. You can also print the selected variable. You can print the selection, and then that's that one. PLC and part, those are very specific to dev work, writing custom parts and so on. So we're not going to get into that one right now. Then you have your main RigBot UI, your main controls UI, and your hand pose UI, which can also be accessed from the toolbox here. Hand pose. It is the same thing for setting your fist and cup and spread attributes on fingers and toes. Then you have wings, which I'll make another video on that soon. And that's the rigging shelf. Also, if for whatever reason you need to reload the entire tool set, You can right click on the RigBot button and reload the rigging tools. It will reload the entire system for you. And that's the RigBot shelf.